Okay, we just created a histogram. What we're going to do next is to find a random sample. So let's go back to the data sheet here, and let's assume for the moment that this is the entire population of all the business schools in the country. And we weren't going to be able to survey all of them, so we wanted to find a random sample of just 5 of these business schools to include in our sample statistic, or sample statistic analysis. So what we're going to do is click the data button up here and go again to data analysis. And there is another analysis tool, if you scroll down, called sampling. So let's click OK. And the input range that we want to use for our sampling is going to be all the tuition and fee numbers here. Okay, so we're going to pick all the numbers, leave off the label in this case, and click on the little down arrow. And then the number of samples that we want to create is 5. So what you should do is type in the number 5 here. It's probably not already going to be there. And then for the output range, let's put it down in A46, okay? And we click OK. And what you'll discover is that Excel has randomly picked 5 of these numbers from tuition fee and put them down here as a random sample. Now, one thing that's interesting is when you did this, you probably got a different random sample than I got when I did it. Every time you do it, you'll get a different random sample. So this is very similar to us just picking different rows on the random number table and getting a different sample each time. So obviously, each time you calculated the sample statistics for this sample, you would get different values. Okay, let's put in a title for this. So put your cursor in A45 and say sample of 5 tuition and fees values. Okay, and we can highlight our answer. A little paint bucket here, pick a different color. Okay, that is the way that you create a random sample. Okay, now another diagram that we might want to create, because we've got 2 random or 2 variables here, 2 quantitative variables, is a scatter diagram. So to create the scatter diagram, we're going to highlight all of the numbers for both variables, not the titles, but just the numbers. But we're going to highlight for both variables at the same time. And what we're going to do is up here at the menu, click on Insert, and then there is something that is over here under Charts, and we want a scatter chart. You want to pick this one here that looks kind of like a bunch of dots scattered. So that's what's called a scatter XY chart. That's the one we want to pick. So click on that. And which one do we want? Well, we want this one with no lines. So just click on the scatter with no lines. And you notice it overwrites some other data that we've already got on our worksheet. So let's take it and grab it down here a little ways and get it out of the way. And we can pick the corner and stretch it out and make it a little bit bigger so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Okay, so it's created a scatter plot for us. It was that easy, but we still need to do some modifications just to make it look a little bit prettier. First of all, let's change the title. Instead of calling it chart title, we can just double click on this and change it to say tuition and fees versus salary and bonus. And now it's a little more meaningful. Okay, sometimes it'll put a little legend over here. If it does, you can just click on that and right-click on it and delete and get rid of the legend. But I don't have a legend, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to do that. The next thing we want to do is add axis titles. So up here, we're going to click on Design. If you have an old version of Excel, it may say Layout. And click on Add Chart Element, Axis Titles. And we're going to do the primary horizontal first here. And change the primary horizontal to say tuition and fees. And you can put dollar sign if you want. That's actually better so that we know that this is in dollars. Okay, and then we want to do the same thing for the vertical axis, axis titles, primary vertical, and the vertical axis in this case for a scatter diagram is actually the other variable name, which in this case is salary and bonus, also in dollars. Okay. Now, one other thing that we often want on a scatter diagram is a trend line, and we're going to learn probably in the next video how to actually calculate a regression analysis. But you can add a trend line to your scatter plot here very simply. Just pick any dot, it doesn't matter which one you pick, but put your cursor over the dot and then right-click, and you'll see that one of the choices is Add Trend Line. So just click on Add Trend Line, and the one that we want is a linear. That's probably going to be the default, and so that will show up. And if it does, you're set. If not, just change it to linear, and that's the answer. That was that easy. Now that is the trend line that the regression analysis is actually going to predict. What it did in the background was really run a regression analysis for us. But we're going to learn how to see the entire data that comes out of the regression analysis in a few minutes. Okay, so that is the scatter plot. The next thing we want to do with two quantitative variables is find the correlation between those two variables, the correlation coefficient. So go to Data, Data Analysis, and there's another choice over here called Correlation. So click on that and click OK. Now, the input range in this case is going to include both variables because you can't do correlation with just one variable. You have to have two variables. And the way correlation is set up, we're going to show the titles as well. So include the titles as well as all of the numbers. Click the down arrow. It's grouped by columns. We say there are labels in the first row. And then we're going to put the output range, instead of in a new worksheet, we're going to put it in some unused part of our sheet here. Let's put it over here in J1. Okay, and we click OK. And if you scroll over here now, you will see that we have a little chart that shows us correlation coefficients. Now let's expand these columns so that we can read it a little bit better. Okay, so now what we see is that it shows the variables going along the columns as well as along the rows. And if you had more than two variables, it would show you a matrix of all of the different correlation coefficients between those variables. Since we only had two variables, it's only showing us two columns and two rows. And the correlation, of course, between a variable and itself is going to be 1. Of course, there's a perfect correlation between any variable and itself. But the correlation between salary and bonus and tuition and fees in this case is 0.8, approximately 0.86. Okay, so that is the correlation coefficient. And we can highlight that. As the correlation coefficient. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is a regression analysis. I'm going to stop the video and put that in a different part of the video.